After listening to the podcast, Nobody Should Believe Me, I found that it lacked foundation and awareness. It made me wonder, what is the host's Andrea Dunlop's background? What makes her qualified to speak on Munchausen by proxy? People might assume that Andrea Dunlop is an expert on the topic, but here's the truth. She does not hold a medical degree, she is not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist, and she does not diagnose medical or psychiatric conditions. She wrote one book on the topic. Her work is based on advocacy, podcasting, writing mostly fiction, and reviewing cases from a media perspective. That places her in the same category as many others who have studied Munchausen by proxy without clinical training, informed commentators, not medical authorities. We're fortunate to have someone in this community who truly has the education and clinical experience to understand the medical documentation involved in the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case, and that's Becca Scoops. Becca is a retired registered nurse with years of hands-on experience working in psychiatric and cardiothoracic units at Los Angeles County Medical Center, a facility known for handling some of the most complex and severe medical cases imaginable. Coincidentally, that's also where I completed a significant portion of my own nursing training, so it's entirely possible Becca and I even shared an elevator at some point. Given that this case involves serious psychiatric issues and a homicide marked by brutal chest wounds, Becca's background couldn't be more relevant. She is highly educated in both areas, bringing exactly the kind of clinical insight this discussion demands. As if Becca wasn't enough of a treasure, Becca's husband, Mitch, a retired detective who worked in San Diego, one of the largest cities in the nation and a major border city, lends his expertise to the case. His career history brings added law enforcement challenges, including higher case volume, cross-jurisdictional crime, and increased investigative risk tied to international trafficking routes and population density. Mitch brings first-hand experience in evaluating evidence, testing timelines, assessing credibility, and identifying behavioral patterns under real-world pressure. Together, Becca's clinical expertise and Mitch's investigative experience form a powerhouse when it comes to analyzing a case as complex and layered as this one. Their combined perspective offers grounded, multidisciplinary analysis rooted in evidence, not narrative. I'm probably not sharing anything about Becca and Mitch that you aren't already aware of. Consider this a friendly reminder of who they are and what they bring to the truth train. I'm pointing this out because the contrast is key. Andrea Dunlop does not hold medical credentials, does not have clinical training, and does not possess qualifications that would entitle her to use the term expert in a medical or psychiatric context. There's a difference between studying a topic as a layperson and being credentialed to interpret medical records, genetic findings, and psychiatric documentation. Becca and Mitch bring education, clinical experience, and investigative discipline to the table. Andrea brings commentary. That distinction is worth keeping in mind as you decide whose analysis you trust. Andrea brings commentary, but even that commentary becomes questionable when it's clear she hasn't researched the case. There is no reasonable excuse for that level of negligence, especially given the access she has to information and the platform she uses to influence public opinion. I know this because I personally informed her. I sent both Andrea and her publicist a detailed email that included FOIA-obtained material debunking Gypsy's claims of medical abuse. That information was delivered directly, clearly, and with supporting documentation. At that point, ignorance is no longer accidental. When someone has been provided primary source evidence and chooses not to engage with it, that's not an oversight, It's a decision, and continuing to speak authoritatively after being presented with contradictory evidence calls the credibility of that commentary into question. Listening to Andrea Dunlop's podcast episode with Gypsy Rose Blanchard was frustrating because many of us already know what the evidence shows. What made it worse was Andrea pinning a statement that banned questions or comments suggesting Gypsy's abuse stories might be false. Banning questions isn't transparency, it's control. And when someone refuses to allow questioning, it usually isn't because the answers are strong. It's because they aren't. Open discussion is how truth is tested. Silencing disagreement doesn't protect facts, it protects a narrative. And when a host shuts down reasonable questions after being provided primary source evidence, that choice speaks for itself. So why would Andrea Dunlop support Gypsy Rose Blanchard's narrative? In my view, the answer is the same reason others have: attention and money. Controversial stories bring clicks. Clicks bring downloads. Downloads bring revenue. Supporting a sensational narrative boosts visibility, grows an audience, and pads a platform. That doesn't mean it's true. It means it's profitable. Truth doesn't always perform well. Evidence doesn't always trend. But a dramatic story, especially one that discourages questioning, does. So when someone continues to amplify a narrative after being presented with contradictory evidence, I'm left to draw my own conclusion. To me, this doesn't look like a search for truth. It looks like a business decision, and that's the problem. When profit is prioritized over facts, the audience isn't being informed. They're being sold a story. And we've already been sold Gypsy's story several times. At the end of the day, it's about credibility, evidence, and honesty. When people choose narrative over documentation, silence over questions, and profit over facts, the public deserves to be told that plainly. You don't need a degree to tell stories, sometimes just an active imagination. But when stories are framed as truth, especially in cases involving real medical claims, real victims like Dee Dee Blanchard, and real consequences, accuracy becomes non-negotiable. I'll continue to stand on evidence, primary records, and professional insight from those qualified to interpret them. You're free to listen to whomever you please, but remember to always check a person's credibility and know the difference between commentary and expertise, and between a story that sells and a truth that holds up.
And so I don't know anything about your genetic condition that you do have, but I would.
Well, you think maybe that would have been something you would need to look into before you start championing this woman and claiming that a whole movement that has researched and done their homework on this is a bad faith argument that we don't know what we're talking about. How can you use your platform to talk like this when you know nothing about the case, Andrea?
I would guess that quite a lot of the
I'm going to back it up. I don't know anything about, she's like, I don't know anything about your condition. Wouldn't you need to know about her condition? Wouldn't you ask her, well, can you tell me about the procedures you did have? Can you tell me how your mother induced illness in you to make those procedures happen? You're the one that's making a bad faith argument, Andrea, not me, and not the people that are on the truth train.
Illnesses in a child. And so I don't know anything about your genetic condition that you do have, but I would guess that quite a lot of the interventions that your mom, applied had
interventions that her mom applied.
Nothing to do with your condition. And
so the interventions, she claimed that her mom applied, but forget that because we know Dee Dee didn't do any of that. All of it, Andrea, has to do with her genetic condition. All of it. It has to do with her GI tract. Okay, Andrea? And Gypsy had issues with her GI tract. Started with her mouth, with her swallowing issues, started with the feeding aversion that she had. She weighed 36 pounds at 8 years old. They had to have her in the feeding hospital for a month, okay, before they ever gave her the feeding tube. If you want to know about it, the information is out there.